Okay, let's unpack this. We're about to take a deep dive into some truly wild and insightful material today.
Yeah, this is excerpts from Kim Barker's memoir, The Taliban Shuffle.
Exactly. It's her account of being a foreign correspondent in Afghanistan and Pakistan during a really critical, chaotic time.
And what we have here, it's not just, straightforward news reporting.
No, not at all. It's this incredibly personal journey, but it's woven through all the complex political stuff, the social upheaval she was actually reporting on.
Right. So our mission today really is to dig out the essential nuggets.
Yeah, the surprising facts, the key insights into what was really happening on the ground, and, well, frankly, the often absurd human story behind it all.
She was there roughly, what, 2003 to 2009?
Yeah, around then, bouncing between Kabul and Pakistan, doing everything from military embeds to, navigating the local scene with fixers.
It's just this window into the chaos, the culture shock, the danger.
And the personal toll, definitely. That comes through loud and clear.
So let's jump right in. She arrives in Afghanistan, and it's just immediate immersion.
Right, no easing in. One of the first really striking moments she shares is meeting this warlord, Pachakan.
And what's so fascinating, it's not just that she met a warlord, but the detail, the texture of it.
Totally. Pachakan looking exactly how you'd picture him, the traditional clothes, the vest, the bandolier.
That turban, yeah. Even looked a bit like a chubby Saddam Hussein, she says.
And then there's the hospitality, this incredibly greasy food, basically just gristle.
Right, it's those specific details that just ground you in the reality of it and how quickly things get complicated.
Oh, yeah. Pachakan asks if she's Muslim.
And her fixer, Farouk, he instantly says yes.
But then Pachakan asks her to pray for him.
And Farouk has to pivot, like lightning fast. Says she's Turkish-American, only knows prayers in English, not Arabic.
Pachakan's reaction just glares and grunts. She is a very bad Muslim.
And Farouk, bless him, just agrees to keep the peace.
Yeah.
Yes, very bad.
That whole exchange, it's just such a brilliant, immediate insight into the tightrope walk she and her fixers were constantly on.
Yeah, it wasn't about, strict truth all the time. It was about easing the situation, sometimes with these little quick white lies.
Lies that could potentially be life-saving.
Exactly. And the danger isn't just confined to meeting warlords. It's just, well, it's everywhere.
She describes staying on this hotel in Coast felt like a scene out of High Noon, men sleeping on the balcony, fingers near their triggers.
That feeling of being totally exposed, even when you're just trying to get basic stuff done.
And the source mentions the roads, bone-crushing roads just getting to places like Coast.
Then this sort of casual conversation with Farouk hits her with this dose of horrifying reality.
About his journalist friends.
Yeah. Held hostage by Pachakan for 4 days, just because they worked for American media and Americans had killed his son.
And she's just trying to get her sat phone to work because the power's out, and Farouk just drops this bomb on her.
The Afghan president had to intervene to get them freed. Suddenly, that 7-hour drive back through Pachakan's territory, it feels profoundly different.
It makes you think about the hidden risks, doesn't it, for everyone involved?
Absolutely. And it makes you pause and wonder, okay, who is this person who ended up here? The source gives glimpses of her background. Montana, right?
Yeah, pretty sheltered upbringing, bull testicles on the menu, stealing a Christmas tree.
Having these neurotic childhood fears of, like, peppercorns or the Ayatollah Khomeini.
It's almost comically mismatched with becoming a foreign correspondent in a war zone.
Totally. She'd never even been to Europe, spoke only English, knew basically nothing about Al-Qaeda or Islam when she first got the idea.
But it was this powerful desire for adventure, maybe escape. Escaping writing obits after that Seattle Times shooting.
That drive, sometimes born from trauma or just needing a massive change. Yeah. It's a real insight into what pushes people into these high-risk jobs.
And this is where her relationship with Farouk, the fixer, becomes so central.
The source details his background. He was a failed surgeon.
Right. But he found he could make way more money, like $50 a day, working with foreign journalists.
Compared to maybe $100 a month as a doctor.
That's a striking detail, isn't it? It highlights this kind of unintended consequence of all the foreign media and aid money flooding in.
Yeah, potentially drawing talented, educated Afghans, like doctors, away from critical local jobs because the economics just get totally skewed.
Farouk isn't just a guide. He's kind of an example of these complex ripple effects of the international presence.
So she gets to Kabul, and the source describes life there as this weird oscillation. Tense 1 minute, surprisingly normal, even quiet, the next.
So how does she navigate that daily reality?
Well, this is where the foreigner bubble really comes into focus,
Places like Latmosphere.
which she calls the Tears of Kabul, yeah, or the Gandamak guest house.
These weren't just places to sleep or eat. They were like essential sanctuaries. Places for foreigners to gather, process, or just escape.
And get kicked out, apparently.
Oh,
Yeah.
the Gadandamac story. It's perfect because of complaints about her laundry.
Her $70 Gap blouse got tie-dyed green.
And the slow internet. But that anecdote, while funny, it's a real insight into the cultural friction.
Yeah, she contrasts the Afghan reaction, this quiet seething at what they saw as, entitled foreigner demands, with how it might have been handled differently in Pakistan.
Right, because of its history with the British. It shows how even small things expose these deeper cultural gaps.
And the social scene inside that bubble sounds wild.
The Kabul cute or mission pretty thing.
Yeah, we're in this environment with a skewed gender ratio. People's perceived attractiveness just like skyrocketed.
Parties with stun grenades going off, finding nomads on trampolines.
Rockets flying overhead, sometimes not even stopping the party.
It's that surreal mix again. Extreme danger right next to utterly bizarre social dynamics.
All happening in this physical environment she describes so vividly. Cold, gritty, fecal.
And the literal street names, Butcher Street, Chicken Street.
Yeah. Chicken Street evolving from a proper market to this tourist trap selling the same old souvenirs. These sensory details really bring the place to life.
We also get introduced to some key figures shaping events then. Zalmay Khalilzad, the U.S. ambassador.
Right. Afghan-born. Sounds incredibly hands-on and unfiltered.
The source notes accusations he strong-armed the former king to clear the path for Karzai.
And pushed through a constitution, creating a very strong presidency, which was kind of new for Afghanistan.
Yeah, and the source also mentions his Afghan reconstruction group, which ended up duplicating efforts with, like, state and USA.
Leading to bureaucratic infighting. It highlights that the challenges weren't just external. There was significant dysfunction within the international effort itself.
One analogy Barker uses that really stuck with me from the source is the Kabul Zoo.
Oh, yeah. The story of the animals during the Civil War is just heartbreaking.
Crane and flamingo kebabs, tigers killed for pelts, the elephant shot 40 times.
And the bear, Marjan, surviving with his scars, becoming this really potent symbol of Afghanistan's suffering.
Only for Marjan to die just 2 months after the Taliban fled. Almost like his purpose as a symbol was over.
And then the zoo becomes another example of how aid money could go sideways, over $500,000 coming in.
Becoming this money tar pit, as she calls it, where it didn't necessarily help the animals or the zoo as intended.
And that completely inappropriate donation of pigs from China, considered unclean in Islam, just underscores the lack of cultural understanding sometimes.
That blend of tragedy and absurdity, it's just constant, like the beggar catch and release program she saw.
Right, from a government bus.
Yeah.
And the source gives us these unforgettable images of the regulars, the boy with flippers for arms.
The girl leading her blind brother, Egg Boy, crying next to his broken eggs every day.
It's just a snapshot of the persistent human desperation underneath the surface of that foreign bubble.
So she's navigating this complex Kabul environment, but eventually the focus shifts more to reporting the conflict directly. What were her experiences like on embeds with U.S. troops?
Well, she describes them sometimes being almost like an Afghan version of a spa for her compared to the stress of her personal life at one point.
Weird, right? No alcohol, lots of sleep, this strange low stress. But for the soldiers...
For them, it was the gritty reality of what they felt was a forgotten war.
That's a powerful contrast. They'd complain about getting generic letters meant for troops in Iraq.
And she observed how some soldiers, just craving connection in that isolation, would open up about incredibly personal stuff. Divorce, infidelity, loneliness.
While she felt this pressure to maintain professional distance, give nothing back about her own life.
The embedded Hellman sounds particularly intense.
Yeah, ground zero for the conflict, heart of the poppy trade. Once Little America.
Now controlled by influential Afghans profiting heavily from drugs. And that German photographer's immediate warning to her.
This place is hell. Get out while you can. Tells you everything, doesn't it?
And you see these profound disconnects on display there. Like an Afghan soldier emptying his entire ammo tub into one militant on a motorcycle.
Because the Taliban had killed his brother. That raw, personal vengeance overriding tactics.
Or village elders asking U.S. soldiers to leave. Not because they were anti-American, but just because their presence scared people. especially women and children.
Even when they were there with a medical convoy, not exactly winning hearts and minds in that situation.
Beyond the military, she also interacted with Afghan officials. The source mentions her meeting Karzai.
Who consistently called her ma'am. Yeah. And that notable moment where he plays the ethnicity game.
Asking her to identify the ethnicity of elders around him, trying to make a point, maybe subtly, about Afghan unity despite the divisions.
Then there's Sabit, this Afghan official who becomes this incredibly complex, eccentric figure in her reporting life.
Offers perks, but he's demanding, gets weirdly angry if she mentions other friends,
Keeps guns everywhere, like other people keep plants.
and insists she drive his car even though she hasn't driven in years.
He sounds like a mix of a valuable source and a complete headache.
Totally. And the source details his later standoff with Dostum, a powerful warlord, which really highlights the weakness of the central government Karzai was trying to build.
Against these entrenched regional power brokers.
And the story of Jack Idema, Tora Bora Jack, it's almost unbelievable.
This guy running an illegal jail, capturing Afghans off the street under the cover of an import-export business.
Driven by this bizarre anti-jihad ideology and, well, clearly craving personal glory.
He had a fraud conviction in the U.S. before coming to Afghanistan.
But somehow managed to convince U.S. forces and international peacekeepers to help his operations initially. The source says he was a legend in Kabul.
They even had a cocktail named after him at the Mustafa Hotel bar, where he'd supposedly put bullet holes in the ceiling.
It's just surreal.
And the detail about the Afghan jailers treating him and the other Americans he was jailed with as guests.
While other Afghan inmates were kept like dogs at a pound, just adds another layer to the deep systemic dysfunction and corruption.
So, stepping out of the Kabul bubble, Pakistan presented a completely different, maybe even more disorienting environment.
Yeah, the source describes it as a funhouse and bipolar.
And underpinning so much, there was the pervasive influence of the ISI, Pakistan's spy agency.
The source mentions them actively recruiting for the Afghan Taliban, meddling to ensure a pro-Pakistan government in Kabul.
Hedging against India, essentially playing this complex double game.
Taking Western money to hunt al-Qaeda while simultaneously supporting the very Afghan Taliban who were fighting Western forces.
Whoa!
Crazy.
Reporting there sounds incredibly challenging because of that. The paranoia is rampant.
Assuming reporters are spies, phones tapped, drivers potentially reporting on you, being constantly tailed by spooks.
The source shares that great detail about Samad, her driver and translator in Pakistan.
Oh yeah, his act for when the ISI questioned him. Pretending to be a small boy, no read, no understand.
It's pure survival theater, and she captures the political volatility around President Musharraf.
His loss of popularity, the Chief Justice controversy that sparked those massive lawyer protests.
With slogans like, Musharraf doggy, son of Bush, wow.
Major events just kept exploding onto the scene. The Red Mosque raid is one example.
She missed it while on vacation, ironically.
Yeah, but the source highlights the high death toll and how militants saw it as a direct call for vengeance.
And then the assassination of Benazir Bhutto, that part of the source, it's rough.
Her being at the rally bombing site, touching a railing, feeling something wet.
And looking down to realize it was pieces of people on the railing?
That detail it hits you. The Force talks about her physical and emotional reaction, needing to scrub her shoes afterward.
This horrific human disaster she struggled to process, make sense of within the bigger political story.
We also hear about Nawaz Sharif returning from exile. The source notes the hair plugs.
His alignment with the lawyers' movement. And she points out the strangely weak security at his rallies, despite the obvious danger.
And that moment where he describes himself as a tiger when asked if he was a lion or a tiger. These little observations capture the peculiar blend of gravitas and almost theatrical absurdity in Pakistani politics.
Through all this chaos, though, the source makes it really clear there's an immense personal toll.
Oh, absolutely. The struggles with relationships back home, trying to maintain connections amidst constant travel, the arguments.
The sheer difficulty of having anything resembling a normal personal life.
She shares this really painful moment with a boyfriend, Dave, in Thailand. It's supposed to be a relaxing vacation.
Instead, they have this huge argument, objects get thrown, and she realizes the relationship is doomed.
It's a striking contrast she draws. The dangers of war felt almost familiar compared to the unpredictable, painful conflict in her personal life.
And then the unexpected challenges back home, like dealing with identity theft in Chicago.
There's that dark irony, isn't there? Surviving war zones only to get robbed back in a supposedly safe American city.
Professionally, the strains built up too. The job wasn't just a job, it felt like her whole identity.
Right. The stress over the Tribune's bankruptcy, the foreign desk being eliminated.
And that bizarre twist where an LA Times editor who became her professional nemesis over some story ended up running the combined foreign desk. Ouch.
You also hear about friends and colleagues facing their own horrific challenges, like Sean Langan's kidnapping and the aftermath of that.
And her fixer, Farouk, eventually leaving Afghanistan for a scholarship.
But not in medicine, his original dream, but communications, highlighting his adaptability and how his path was just fundamentally changed by working with journalists.
Later in her time there, during an embed with the Afghan National Police, the observations are incredibly telling about the scale of the problems.
Illiterate recruits, officers sometimes pointing guns at their own heads,
U.S. soldiers wanting to help them literally steal power as a quick fix.
versus a more cynical view from a DynCorp guy worried about the ingrained corruption. It just shows how enormous the task of building institutions was.
And how deep the corruption and dysfunction ran.
The tensions in Kabul also increased. That standoff between Sabit and Dostum is an example of the central government's fragility.
And the source describes this growing gap between foreigners and Afghans.
She witnesses a drunk American woman in a restaurant shouting she's one step away from Obama.
Cringeworthy. A perfect example of the foreign community often being isolated from and sometimes behaving with incredible insensitivity towards the local culture in a Muslim country.
By 2009, covering the election violence, the source details moments like the bomb near NATO HQ.
Seeing a man covered in blood, noticing the young freelancers eagerly chasing the most graphic details.
And this is where she feels that shift, that sense of being almost done. No longer needing to see more bodies, not needing to physically engage with the horror anymore.
That feeling leads to the decision to leave. The source frames it as this fundamental choice between life and tragedy.
Like an addict quitting, she says, graduating from Kabul High.
Because the party of the foreign bubble was definitively over, symbolized for her by the epic election fraud she witnessed.
It's a powerful way to frame it, not just leaving a job, but leaving a lifestyle, an identity that had become all-consuming.
A difficult choice, but one made after recognizing the significant personal cost of staying in that environment.
So, looking back at this deep dive through Kim Barker's experiences in the Taliban Shuffle, we've really journeyed through this extraordinary mix.
Yeah, bone-crushing danger, laugh-out-loud absurdity, deep cultural misunderstandings, labyrinthine political intrigue.
And the profound, undeniable personal impact of living and reporting in such a volatile place.
It really underscores the irreplaceable value of these kinds of personal accounts, doesn't it?
Absolutely. They don't just report the facts, they immerse you in the experience of living through these complex historical moments.
They help you understand that it's not just about geopolitical forces or military strategies.
But about what it was like for actual people navigating that reality day to day and how it fundamentally shaped them.
Exactly. It makes you ask, what does this all mean for you, the listener? How do these kinds of deeply human stories illuminate global conflicts in a way that, abstract analysis just can't?
How do our own backgrounds and expectations, like Barker's sheltered upbringing versus the chaos she faced, shape what we see and how we react when we're thrust into profoundly unfamiliar, maybe dangerous situations?
And critically, how do we even begin to navigate and make sense of complex, messy realities that just resist neat explanations or simple narratives?
It certainly shows the incredible resilience that people found, but also, the deep toll that eventually had to be paid.
It does, and it leaves you with something to ponder, maybe related to the very title of the book, The Taliban Shuffle.
You have these calculated strategies by groups like the ISI or the Taliban, but alongside that, you have this constant, unpredictable chaos.
The personal eccentricities of figures like Sabit or Idema, the accidental timing of major events, the sheer dysfunction and absurdity everywhere you look.
Culminating in something like epic election fraud, as she puts it.
So how much of what we perceive as calculated moves on the global stage is actually planned, deliberate strategy, and how much is just chaotic improvisation, a continuous, often nonsensical shuffle?